and I heard something going. The problem with us when we get to starting about something, we never actually finish it because we branch off into so many damn different directions that every one of them has very important meaning towards what we're discussing in the first place. What we call a Bigfoot and a Sasquatch, we call them boogers in the South. I said, what in the hell is that?
So we mentioned Oklahoma before, and there's been some disappearances around an area that some of our outlaws are all too familiar with, Dan and Vicky especially, down there around the Binger area. People have probably heard us mention on the show before.
Right.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's specifically out east of Binger, there's a lake called Salyer Lake. And I had heard about disappearances around Salyer Lake for decades. And I did a little bit of an investigation out in that area. And since then, Dan and Vicky have done even more than I have out there. And from what I understand, talking to some of the locals and who are native residents of that area, there have been at least 35 documented disappearances in the area in and around Salyer Lake over the years. And the Salyer Lake used to be open for swimming. There were so many people that were just supposedly, according to eyewitness accounts, were jerked underwater, or would be paddling around out there in the lake in a rowboat or a canoe or something, and the boat and the whatever watercraft it was would suddenly be flipped over, and one of the occupants would just disappear, would never come back up. And they would drag the lake, do all kind of stuff, send scuba divers down, and they they would never find the bodies. There were reports that there were caves around the edges of the lake that you could get into from under the water and come up inside the caves. There were some reports from some high school kids that supposedly, and I would not put a whole lot of credence into this because, you never know. It could have just been made up or whatever, but supposedly some high school kids claimed at one time that they were swimming in one area, one part of the lake where there was a pretty high bank on that side, and they were poking around down in some rocks, and they found a cave that went back up under the bank, and that they wrapped up a flashlight in a plastic bag or something. Don't know exactly how they did it, but this was back in the days before they had waterproof flashlights. But they got a flashlight, or they carried candles in a plastic bag or something, and they came up in there, turned on whatever type of illumination device that they had, and they found a bunch of bones and stuff up in there, and body parts and things, and they got the hell out of Dodge. There's also was a couple of reports of someone actually seeing a Bigfoot swimming under the water there in Salyer Lake. And I know for a fact from what an incident that we had, you were there. In fact, I think that might have been the first outing that I went on where I met you, Matt, down at Lake Texoma, where we had one swim across a bay there on Lake Texoma, come up onto a rock near where we were camped, and I don't remember exactly how we were alerted to its presence. I don't know if Bo tipped us off or somebody heard it. We shined lights over there and saw it. And Vicky took off over there towards it, and the thing dove loudly back into the water and swam for about 200 yards back across this little bay and came up on the far side. And we caught it in spotlights. So, I personally have witnessed one swim 200 yards submerged. So it doesn't surprise me at all that one could swim around about anywhere it wanted to in Salyer Lake.
Right. There was an area I investigated years later in Oklahoma where there was at least one that was swimming across about, close to 200-300 yards of a lake to get from one area to the other. That was the only way it could get there, at least, unless it grew wings and flew. But I thought it was more likely that it was swimming across.
Right.
And I know that lake that you're talking about, they've closed it down multiple times because of the disappearances.
Right.
And blocked it off from people accessing it. And that's not a big community. Yeah, I think you can, but
yeah, when I was there personally with Dan, it was blocked. You couldn't get in there. They had it all closed off. Yeah. That was years ago. But yeah, you're right about that. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was just saying that's not a real big community.
Right.
So, that many disappearances, was a major deal down there. And
exactly.
Word of it traveled all over the place.
Right. And this didn't happen all at once. This happened over a period of decades.
Right.
Also in that same area, and this really surprised me when I was down there investigating and talking to people, was that Route 152 passes through that area, and it goes right past Salyer Lake, goes right through Binger, and heads on out to the west. Route 152, Oklahoma Route 152, parallels the old historic Route 66, and it runs south of Route 66, but pretty much goes to the same place. It goes in it's an alternate route. And back during the Depression, there were a lot of people traveled that road, Route 152. And as was common along the major thoroughfares back in that day, there were camps, or people would go as far as they could, and there weren't a lot of motels, and back in those days, the folks that were having to move, cross country and move around a lot, didn't have the money to go to a motel anyway, even if there'd been one. So they would just stop and camp on the side of the road. And there were quite a number of people that disappeared that were camping along the side of Route 152 in and around the Binger area. And they would go out there. They would find a car sitting there, and in a tent or something, or evidence that they'd set up some kind of camp. Nobody'd be there. Everybody'd be gone. They would have just disappeared. Or they would, be out there, and somebody would go out and to relieve themselves in the middle of the night, never come back. So I'm sure that some of the disappearances back during the Depression along that road were due to, probably people, preying on the folks that were having to do that. That's pretty well documented thing. But it's that area right there was known for an extraordinarily high amount of disappearances.
Well, it's that same area. I think we've touched on the show before, where travelers come through, like small town Oklahoma is one thing. Small town Oklahoma Indian communities are even worse. They don't like outsiders.
Exactly.
They don't like people coming into their areas and snooping around.
Right.
And,
Right.
you know, the stories is that, you know, travelers would come through and, you know, ask for directions or something, and the locals would send them into this area, and the people would never make it all the way through, you know?
Yep.
Lots of stories from down around that area of mysterious disappearances.
Exactly. Yeah. And just like you know, Brown Springs, Oklahoma, we know that there was a lot of disappearances of people that were actually preyed upon,
right,
in that area. But we also know that there was a lot of other really bad stuff that happened. You know, that are Bigfoot related. You know, I don't know, the one of the tribes there is they actually have they believe that they have a connection with the Bigfoot. As a matter of fact, they have a person in the tribe that comes along about every 100 years or so, a woman that comes along that's that has some kind of a tie or spiritual tie or something with the Bigfoot, and they call her the Babu woman. In fact, you and I, Matt, we know the current Babu woman for this particular tribe.
We sure do.
We're not going to mention her name or anything, but we personally know her, as well as I mean, there are quite a number of the outlaws that know this lady, and I thought it was, tell you the truth, a bunch of hooey till I was around her 2 or 3 times, and
yeah,
the insights that she gave me were just astounding, and things that proved out to be true.
Right.
But that's about all I think that's about all we can say about that at this point.
Yeah, well, I was kind of like you. I mean, some of it, honestly, you know, could very well just be stories. I get that. But then there's a good part of it that turned out, like you said, later on, you find out, like, well, no, that was true. And it definitely leaves you scratching your head. I know whenever I was at her place there on her property, I saw something. Several large somethings that weren't cattle, but they were big enough, you know, that you could see them from about 300-400 yards away, down walking along the tree line and everything on the back side of the pasture. And it's a weird place.
Were you there? I'm not gonna name the name of the park, but were you there when we were? This might have been my second. This is probably our second outlaw outing, official outlaw outing into Oklahoma, and we were at a particular state park, and this particular lady came, and we were having trouble. Our dogs were absolutely terrified of this one particular area of the park,
right,
and near our camp. But it was shady there. There was a lot of nice trees in the area, and we thought it'd be a good place to.
It was the only shade there.
Right. It was the only shade there. So those of us that had dogs on the trip, we were trying to tie our dogs out over there, and the dogs were going absolutely ape shit crazy. Bo kept twisting out of his collar, and I kept tightening it up tighter to try to keep him in, and he would get out of there and run and go get under the truck. And the other dogs, Vicky's dogs were little old Max was going crazy. Little little miniature schnauzer. And this lady showed up and she says, "Oh, don't put your dogs over there. There's evil spirits over there. Let them go. Take them down there over by those trees," which were quite a ways from the camp. But we took them down there and we put their chains around those trees. Well, they just laid right down and just were perfectly calm, and they were way away from the camp.
Yeah.
And normally the dogs always want to be just as close to us as they possibly could get. But
well, I can attest to Bo wanting to be up your butt as much as possible.
Exactly. But he didn't want to be anywhere up around that. He didn't want to be anywhere near that grove of trees that was there right beside our campsite. And no way, Jose. You know, I tried several times, during that trip to even walk him up there to so he could relieve himself. You could not drag him into that little grove of trees.
Well, on that same trip, there was also an incident, if I remember it right, where she said that there's one up there right now watching us.
Oh, God, yes.
And the dogs alerted on it just as soon as she said it.
Yes. And we were sitting there, and we were sitting there, and it was getting dark, and she said, she just had to look up there. She said, "Well, it's still there." So I just eased over to my truck. I didn't say a thing, and I got out I had a 6 million candle power, portable spotlight. And I eased it out of the truck, and I pointed it up there, and I clicked it on. Son of a gun, there it was. We saw the eye shine and just got a glimpse of it as it jerked back out of the way, back behind the rim of the canyon. I said, "Holy crap."
It was an interesting trip for sure.
Oh, yeah, that was a very eye-opening trip. And that's where the first time I ever heard was introduced to the idea of a whole troop of dogmen.
Yeah.
On that trip. That was, and now I was totally not expecting that. I thought the dogmen were just totally isolated beings. They're very few and far between. I got introduced to the idea that you could have whole troops of them even.
Now, another interesting place that we've researched together, it was down there at Boykin Springs.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that area has some lore surrounding it as well, doesn't it? With cannibal giants.
Yeah, and there is a documented basis in fact about those. There was one of the native tribes that lived in that area was the Atacapa tribe, or Atacapa tribe, and they were very well known for practicing ceremonial or ritualistic cannibalism, primarily on captives, people that they had captured as a result of tribal warfare or whatever, or unfortunate people who happened to wander into their territory. It was pretty well documented that one of the early Spanish explorers that came through that area that they nabbed and ate one of his a member of one of his party. That's historically well documented, but these were regular Indians, regular Native, First Nation, Native Americans, and however, the Choctaw Nation knew about them and left them alone. And in fact, their name, the name for the tribe, the Atacapa, is a Choctaw word that means cannibal people or man-eater people. I think literally it translates to man-eater people. Also, the Alabama tribe moved through that area and hunted along the Gulf Coast down through southern Louisiana and eastern Texas, down towards Galveston, all that, and they knew of that tribe, and avoided them judiciously. So did the Choctaw. There were some of the Caddo and some of the northern tribes to the north out of Oklahoma used to come down in there and hunt in the upper part of the present Big Thicket area, but they were very careful not to venture too far south down into the area of the Takapa tribe. And now, the Takapas were wiped out by European diseases. I mean, that's a fact, a documented fact. However, and there were some of the survivors, tribal survivors, that practiced cannibalism on up into the 20th century. That's documented. But even members of that tribe, as well as the other tribes, also talked about cannibalistic giants that lived in that area. The actual Atakapa tribe were normal. They were of normal stature and everything. But there was even like I said, even they talked about cannibalistic giants that would prey on anybody in the area, including them. So, and there are still legends that and stories about them still being in the area and active. And I know one thing of all my travels everywhere, all over the United States, I have never gotten into a larger group of them ever as what we got into down there at Boykin Springs the first time. And I think that's true for every one of us that were in the group.
Yeah.
I've never. We were recording and sort of trying to log the different individual voices as they came in on us from different directions. Plus, we had a thermal device with us where we could pick out individuals, and we counted at least 18 altogether coming in on us. 18 individuals that we could distinguish, and there may have been more than that, but we were able to pick out at least 18 individuals, and I'm talking about discern them individually using the thermal device that we had.
There was several. I went down to that location several different occasions with different groups of people each time, and there was never a time that I was there where we weren't outnumbered.
Right.
They always had the numbers, regardless of how big the group was.
Right.
And that's a pretty rare occurrence.
Right. Exactly. It is an exceedingly rare occurrence. You were totally right about that. And we didn't tuck tail and run either till we actually had our eyeballs on them. So it wasn't anybody. It wasn't a bunch of locals, out there hooting and hollering in the woods, a bunch of rednecks making a bunch of racket and coming at us. No, these were boogers. We didn't break till they were busting out of the tree line coming towards us, and till we were a whole lot closer to them than what we wanted to be.
Right.
And in fact, Bear was way closer than he wanted to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bear almost became buddies.
I didn't know that old fat boy had an overdrive gear, but he does. With proper motivation, he can haul ass, and it doesn't take him 2 trips.
He can get it all in one, huh?
He can get it all in one. Let me tell you. And he can pile into an F-250 pickup just as slick as any NASCAR driver can pile into through the window of their NASCAR.
Hey, I watched him and Sammy pile into my Explorer one time down there in Texas, and I thought they were the Duke boys.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. if there's a hole, he's gonna go through it.
Another story that I wanted you to talk about was that one that you heard from the late Mary Green. Mary was a very well known, very knowledgeable researcher.
Yeah. Yes, very knowledgeable.
Quite a few of the outlaws were friends with.
Yeah. Mary and I had a little disagreement and dust up at one point, but we eventually, made up and became friends again. And we realized that what had caused our problems wasn't really either one of us. It was someone else that was throwing a bunch of undue influence into the mix. But anyway, that's a whole nother story beside the point. But what I wanted to relate was that back. Mary and I used to talk a lot, and I had an experience where I used to have to work pretty long hours at times, and it was spring of the year, and about in April. And anybody that lives in the South in April knows that you have to mow the grass a lot of times 2 times a week, and that's what was going on there at my house. And I had about 2 acres to mow. And I had a big commercial size Dixon. It was a 4500 something. I can't remember the model number, but it was one of the largest Dixon 0-turn radius mowers that they made. And being a commercial mower and designed to be used on golf courses or whatever at all hours of the night and day, it had lots of lights. It had lights across the front. It had lights down each side, so that you could see all around you, so that you could use the 0-turn feature at any time. I'd gotten home probably about 9 o'clock, and my yard had I had a yard light or a booger light out behind the house in the backyard, and I had one out in the front yard as well. And plus, I had that mower with had floodlights around the house as well, shined out in the yard. But still, though, they certainly didn't cover the whole 2 acres. And I had I was mowing, started around 9 o'clock at night, and had all the lights on the mower, so they were lit up all the way around. I could see really good too. And I'm blowing along, and my north property line was a creek bank. And on the other side of the creek was a big, thick pine forest. It was very thick. And I was mowing. I had gotten done mowing the yard, the south end of the yard. And I came around. I had mowed the west end of the yard, side of the yard. And I came around to the north. And by this time, it was close to 10 o'clock, something like that. And I'm blowing along there. My first cut, I was cutting as close to the edge of the creek bank as I could. I'm going along. All of a sudden, I heard this loud racket, this loud screaming, squalling racket. And I thought at first that I had jammed something, that something had jammed up under the deck and had stopped one of the blades. And that I had the drive belt was squalling on the drive pulley for that blade. That's what I thought was happening. So I disengaged I just reached over, had a electronically controlled PTO. I just reached over and pushed in the PTO button, which killed it, and stopped the mower deck instantly. But the engine was still revved up. Well, I could still hear the noise going. I thought, well, what in the hell have I got something going on somewhere else? Is my hydrostat pump dry or what? And so I just shoved the throttle all the way off, and the engine, slowed down to a quiet idle. And suddenly I realized that the noise was coming from down in the creek bank, down in the creek bed, sort of in front of me. So I thought, well, what in the world is making all that racket? Because it was because of the racket of even the engine, the mower idling quietly or idling. I still couldn't quite make it out because my hearing's not all that fantastic, and hell, I might have even had earmuffs on at the time. I can't remember, but I made sure all my lights were on, and I eased up a little bit. There was a little hump I had to go up and over so that my lights could shine down in the creek bed. So I pulled up about 6-8 feet, and the front of the mower tilted down a little bit, and the lights were shining right into the creek bed. And oh my God, there is a booger about 8 foot tall standing there in the creek bed screaming at me. And I thought, what in the crap? And I couldn't believe that it was standing there like, 75, 80 feet away, just standing there screaming at me. And there I had all the lights on it, and it wasn't running off. He was pissed. He was really pissed. So I just carefully eased back out of there, and I got a distance away from it, and I saw it was still just standing there screaming, just about with every breath. So when I got a distance away from it, I whirled the tractor around, and I took off up, and I went down the west side of the yard, around the south side of the house, and I started mowing the front yard, the south end of the front yard. Well, I mowed up about as far as I could, and there was a bank there, a pretty high bank where the front yard dropped off down towards the north part of the yard next to the creek. Well, I got done up there, and I didn't hear anything. I idled the engine down. I didn't hear anything, and my lights wouldn't shine all the way down that far. So there I go, back around the south side of the house, back down the west side of the yard, and I ran down into the lower part of the yard into the north there next to the creek. I pick up, start mowing again. Got to the same dadgum place. I heard all the screaming, and I turned a little bit so my lights were shining down into the creek bed again, and there the booger is standing there in the exact same place that he was before. So I decided, this ain't no good. I'm pissing this guy off. And I had heard, I'd heard stories about farmers and stuff working late at night planting, because, when it's planting time or combining time, if the weather's good, you got to go till you can't go anymore. And if it means working all through the night, that's what you do. And I had heard of farmers out there in the field at night stopping to reload their planter hoppers, put more seed, more fertilizer in, whatever, or having some kind of equipment trouble and having to stop, or they're combining and their hopper's full and they have to wait for the truck to come so they can auger out into the truck and start combining in there. And while they're out there, it stopped. All of a sudden they hear something screaming at them and start shining the lights around. There's a booger standing there screaming at them. I'd heard stories like that since I was a kid. Well, I thought, well, this is happening to me, and I'm out here mowing my grass. So I just disengaged the PTO that drove the mower deck again, and I took off around, ran the tractor up under the carport, and decided I can finish this tomorrow in the daylight. I went in the house. Well, I don't know if it was that night or later that night, or it might have been the next day. For some reason, I was talking to Mary Green on the telephone, and I told her about what had happened the night before. And she said, "Oh, Tim, don't ever do that." She said, "Don't you know that they hate loud noises at night? That they don't like that at all." And she said, especially this time of year when the little ones, when you've got new little ones with the troop, and they don't want them all stirred up. And I said, well, I've heard of this kind of stuff. And she said they will get violent with you. She said and this is when she related the story that Matt was referring to. She said, I just got through investigating a disappearance. where of a man up here in and I can't remember the name of the county. I don't remember if it was Sevier County, Tennessee. It's up there in the edge, right off the edge of the Smoky Mountains, real close to where she lived. One of those counties. It wasn't Roane County. I can't remember the name of the county for sure. But anyway, she told me the name of the county. Fella, they had a farm back there in the hills, and they had a pretty long road that went from the main highway back up into a holler there, or into a cove where their home was. And of course, you know, you got all that time of the year, the grass grows up high and everything, and up tight against the side of their drive going back to the house. Well, they like to try to keep it bush hogged down or mown down, and you know, keep it looking nice. So the guy was on a tractor, probably about a 50, 60 horse tractor. That you know, that's a medium-sized tractor for folks that are not familiar with farm implements, and it did not have a cab, so it's just an open seat on the back of the tractor. And he had what we call a bush hog or a brush hog on the back of the tractor that mows the grass down. And he's mowing along up beside the driveway. A distance from their house, 100 yards or so, a couple hundred yards from their house, there's a creek that comes down out of the holler and is running along the left side of the driveway as you're headed out towards the main drag, towards the highway that the drive runs out to. He was mowing alongside of that, and his wife had told him that hey, she'd been working doing something, and they were having a late supper, and she said, well, I'll have supper ready here in about 20 minutes. And he said, well, that'll give me enough time. I could go ahead and make one pass out to the road and then turn around and come back down the other side of the driveway coming back to the house. So I can at least get that much done for supper. Well, she got supper ready, and husband hadn't come back. So she got to wondering about him and wonder what's going on. Well, she looks out the door of the house, walks out the front door of the house, and she sees the lights of the tractor out there, a couple of 300 yards away from the house, on the side, off the side of their drive, towards the creek. And she figured, well, he's had some kind of trouble, something's wrong with the tractor, that don't know what could have happened. And well, she thought, well, he'll be here in just a minute. So she waits about 10 minutes or so and walks back out there to check on him again. The tractor hadn't moved. So she thought, well, maybe he needs some help. So she gets in the truck and drives up there. There's the tractor sitting there running. The husband's nowhere to be found. She hollered and looked and hollered, and she was scared half to death at what had happened. She was so scared. She was scared that he had fallen off the tractor, and he had fallen up under the bush hog, and that he was all chewed up under the bush hog. So she raised up the hydraulic lift to raise the bush hog up, looked up underneath there, no sign of him. She walked back down where the tractor gun had been running. No blood, no guts, no anything on the ground, nothing to indicate any kind of that he'd fallen off the tractor or anything. And hollers for him a time or two. And then finally she decided she better call the sheriff. And first she called some neighbors, and they came up there and looked for him. And they called the sheriff. Sheriff's departments and deputies and stuff like that came out there, and they looked and started looking for him. And somebody got the idea to call Mary. So Mary was summoned out there, and she went out there in the middle of the night and was shown what had happened and everything. And what she told them was that probably she knew that there had been activity around that area, a lot of activity. And she said probably what had happened was that he'd been out there running that tractor there at night, well after dark, and had probably pissed off the local boogers, and he just came out there, and they probably screamed at him and he didn't hear them, or either he didn't pay attention to them, and they just came and snatched him off that tractor and drug him off somewhere. But she said they brought tracking dogs out there, and the dogs wouldn't even either couldn't get a scent or wouldn't get the scent, but they didn't do a good bit of good. They never found a hide nor hair of the guy.
Just vanished into thin air.
Exactly. So I decided after that I wasn't going to be mowing my yard after dark. I figured that figured I'd gotten off lucky.
So you hear that, fellas? Your wife's harping on you to get that lawn mowed. You can tell her that the Bigfoot Outlaw said don't do it because a Bigfoot will get you.
Yeah. If you live in Bigfoot territory, you better be aware.
Why do you think it bothers them so much? Because there's other stories out there about, them getting pissed off while somebody's chainsawing a tree or running a tractor or anything. Do you think they have super sensitive hearing or something?
I think they do. And I think that it just sort of maybe disturbs them. Maybe it disturbs the little ones. Maybe, it just gets the whole troop agitated. I know we were out one time when I was back when I was in college, and we were out at a place down in South Alabama, and which I have found out since then has fairly large amount of Bigfoot activity. We were over near the west side of Lake Eufaula, down not too far from outside of I think we were within about 12 miles or so, 15 miles or so of maybe a little bit further than that, of Phoenix City, Alabama. And we were sitting out there, had us a campfire built, and somebody one of the guys had an old big old Oldsmobile convertible, had a pretty good stereo in it, and we had an 8-track tape in there playing Led Zeppelin When the Levee Breaks. And if anybody knows that song pretty good, while that song was playing, we had it cranked up pretty loud, about as loud as that old stereo would go in that car, and which was surprisingly loud for that era. And we got screamed at. We heard a lot of screaming over in the woods, not too terribly far away. We didn't really give a rat's ass, so we kept on playing it. And then later on, I don't know if it was on the same tape or it was on a different tape, but Misty Mountain Hop came on, another Led Zeppelin song. That really pissed them off, and they got so loud and so close then, it scared us, and we shut everything down, cleaned up our beer, and got in the car and got out of Dodge. And so I think they don't even, there's at least those boogers weren't Led Zeppelin fans.
Well, you also hear stories about, fishermen out on the lake in their boats after dark getting yelled at. It could be the sound of the boat motor or something.
Right, exactly.
I know that last night I noticed this. There's a dump truck that comes late at night for the commercial dumpster down at the end of the street. And that motor rumbles through my house. Just the low tones. I mean, you can feel it, and it's down the street. I mean, it's nowhere close. But it sounds like it's sitting in the living room with me. Mm-hmm. And a lot of gasoline engine, combustion engines, to be more precise, have some of those hidden tones in them. Mm-hmm. And I think it might have something to do with infrasound, and it kind of disrupting them a bit.
I know. I personally know down here in Audrain County, Missouri, which is just a short distance south of here. In fact, I drove through Audrain County this afternoon on my way back. I was down in Mexico, Missouri, and was headed back up to my home, and I cut through Audrain County, and I went right through this area. There's a guy I know that farms an area down there along a creek bottom, and the fields that he farms are along the north side of this creek, and he was down there planting one spring, trying to get his beans in the ground, and he was using one of these newer John Deere planters. It's got a vacuum system that sort of transports. It's got a big central seed hopper, and then it's got tubes that go out from either side that carry the seeds out to each one of the droppers for the planter. And in other words, it doesn't have an individual seed hopper over each set of planter wheels. It's got a big central hopper. Well, it uses either I can't remember if it uses air pressure or an air vacuum system to pull those seeds through there. But there is I believe it's a vacuum system, but there's a big blower on the planter, and it had jammed up on him or stopped up on him in an area, and it sort of clogged up, and he was out there trying to work on it. And there was a big jam up of seed in part of it, and he was beating on it, and I knew the guy pretty well. We were lodge brothers together, and he knew, me being an old country boy, he knew that I knew how to work on stuff. Plus, I lived not far from his home. So he called me about 1:30 in the morning. He says, "Hey man," he said, "can you come out here and help me?" And I said, "Man, sure. What's going on?" And he asked me to bring some tools and stuff or run by over his place. I said, "Well, I got all that stuff here at the house." And he said, "Well," he told me where he was. And I got out there, and he had been. When I pulled up, I noticed that his tractor was turned around opposite direction to the way he had been going where he had been planting. And I said, "Were you getting ready to leave or something?" He said, "Hell no." He said, "I was getting over where my damn lights were shining down there at the creek." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Hey, well, I hate to admit this." He said, "You've heard the guys talk about the screamer, haven't you?" And that's what the local farmers down there refer to this thing as. They call it the screamer. And he said, "I was out here beating on this damn thing, this damn planter." And he said, "I started hearing all this screaming and yelling down there by the creek." And he said, "It was getting louder." He said, "I thought it was coming closer." He said, I got in the tractor and it turned it around and turned all the lights on shining down there." And I said, "Well, did you see it?" He said, "Well, I got a glimpse of some eye shine, and that was about it." He said, but I stayed here in the cab of the tractor and till I saw you coming." And then a guy that worked for me down in Mississippi, he used to do a lot of repair work on farming equipment, and he said he got called out in the middle of the night one night to come out and work on a planter, or I think it was a planter rather than it wasn't a combine, I don't think. Anyway, so he gets out there in the field, and he pulls up, and the guy won't get out of the cab of his tractor. Yeah, so it was definitely a planter, not a combine. He said the guy wouldn't get out, and he said, "Well, man, I could use some help out here." And he says, "I ain't getting out of here." And he says, "Well, why the hell not?" He says, "That damn wild man down there's been out here raising holy hell." And and I said, then he said, "Hey, that thing ain't gonna bother you. You don't know what you're talking about." And so the guy that worked for me, he got to welded on this broken part and part of the planter, and he said he'd been there a little while, and he said that son of a gun, he said it started screaming and raising Cain again, and his welder ran out. He had a big gas-powered Lincoln welder that sat in the back of his truck, and he had a big F-350 with dually four-wheel drive truck, and he said he had it sitting there idling with the lights on, shining in at the planter, so that diesel was running plus that welder was running, and he said that booger was raising hell, and he said he asked the guy, he said, are you watching that damn thing? And the guy says, I've got a 30-30 up here. He said, I'll shoot at him if he gets close enough. And he said, I think that may be the end of my midnight service calls. He told me. He used to tease me about my booger research and everything, but he had that pretty good encounter, and that made a believer out of him. But, well, they don't like a lot of loud noise at night.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
Well, we've reached our mark, believe it or not. I certainly enjoyed it. We could probably go on a couple more hours, but
wow.
We'll go ahead and cut her off here. Do you got any final statements you want to make?
Well, I don't guess so. Not I can think of right off the top of my head, other than I just appreciate all of our listeners, and I did want to say one thing. Just, we've got a lot of new folks in the members of the room, and probably got a lot of new listeners, but I wanted to make it clear that that we as a group, the Bigfoot Outlaws, we believe that Bigfoot, Sasquatch, boogers, wild man, hairy man, whatever you want to call them, that they are corporeal, flesh and blood creatures. They are not. They're not some kind of a paranormal thing. They don't ride in UFOs. They're not interdimensional travelers. They're just as much flesh and blood as you and I are. They are the masters of camouflage. They're the masters of their habitat. They can be amazingly deceptive. However, they do not have magical powers, like they cannot cloak themselves. They don't walk in and out of portals. They can disappear right in front of you just by using their cover, by being way more familiar with their cover, with their habitat, and how to use it and how to conceal themselves than we could ever even imagine. You can literally be within arm's distance of them at times and never know that they're there. And anybody that has spent enough time in the field researching these things in good habitat and stuff can tell you that. It's astounding how close that they can get. They can literally get close enough to touch you and you not know that they're there.
Right.
I don't know how a 500, 600, 700-pound creature or even larger can sneak up on you without making a sound, but they can do it. I have watched them on thermal imaging cameras sneak right up on us, and you never hear them coming. I've watched multiple ones sneak right up on us, and you never hear them. If we hadn't been alerted to them by one of our booger dogs, and if we hadn't seen them with our thermal, we would have never known they were there, unless they wanted us to know they were there.
I can't count the number of times that we've heard them come crashing in, but we never hear them leave.
Exactly.
I mean, whenever they go into quiet mode, the only explanation I have is their muscle control is amazing.
Yes.
And they're used to walking around in this stuff, barefoot and everything else. You see,
right.
You see gymnasts, doing their routines barefoot on the balance beam and things like that. And it's the same type situation for them, just they're not on a balance beam.
Right.
But they can control every movement and every step, every little pressure point. They control it all.
And I know some of the native legends, like it's Choctaw legend of the Nalusa Falea, they can belly crawl using just their fingers and their toes. And I've watched them do that. And they're not moving their arms and their legs like you and I would do it, like a military low crawl. I don't know how they do it. It's like that I don't know if they got rollers under their bellies or what. If they've got hidden mechanics creepers out there that they're rolling on, but they do it. And but like I said, it's not something magical. It's not anti-gravity or anything like that. They are, like I said, they just have. They are the masters of their environment, and they are the masters of camouflage. They do not have cloaking devices. They just know how to use what's available to them and how to trick your eyes. And they bleed just the same as we do. I guess I'll shut up with that.
Well, I agree totally.
And and in case anybody has any doubt, the Bigfoot Outlaws are a no-kill group.
Right.
We do not advocate killing one, even to prove that they exist. In fact, me personally, I think one of the worst things that could happen to them as a creature would be for the government to fully admit that they exist. I'm glad for them to be officially unrecognized at this point.
Amen to that. I wish a lot of things were unrecognized in that sense. Man has a way of screwing up things whenever we get involved with them.
You got that right. There's already been a lot of tragedy. Probably there's been a lot more tragedy than what we'll ever know about with their encounters with man.
Right.
I believe that they died off. That is just like the Native Americans died off. When the Europeans came into this country, they brought the white man's diseases with them, and I believe they wiped out the native tribes as well as the Bigfoot. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a resurgence of sightings and stuff, is because they're finally recovering from that. They've been recovering for a century or so.
I also think that's one of the reasons that they avoid us like they do.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I want to thank all of our listeners. You guys make it possible. You keep us going. It's amazing. Please keep subscribing and sharing our show, spreading the Bigfoot Outlaw word. Visit us on Facebook. Just look up Bigfoot Outlaws and you can find us. The group page that we hang out on is the Bigfoot Outlaws Hideout. Once again, Jim Hart and the other admins and the moderators of that group do a fantastic job. I know you'll enjoy discussing things there. There's no drama. Just be sure to read the rules and stick to the rules and you'll be okay. We appreciate y'all. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
And I heard something going. The problem with us when we get to starting about something, we never actually finish it because we branch off into so many damn different directions that every one of them has very important meaning towards what we're discussing in the first place. What we call a Bigfoot and a Sasquatch, we call them boogers in the South. I said, what in the hell is that?
So we mentioned Oklahoma before, and there's been some disappearances around an area that some of our outlaws are all too familiar with, Dan and Vicky especially, down there around the Binger area. People have probably heard us mention on the show before.
Right.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's specifically out east of Binger, there's a lake called Salyer Lake. And I had heard about disappearances around Salyer Lake for decades. And I did a little bit of an investigation out in that area. And since then, you never know. It could have just been made up or whatever. But supposedly some high school kids claimed at one time that they were swimming in one area, one part of the lake where there was a pretty high bank on that side, and they were poking around down in some rocks, and they found a cave that went back up under the bank, and that they wrapped up a flashlight in a plastic bag or something. Don't know exactly how they did it, but this was back in the days before they had waterproof flashlights. But they got a flashlight, or they carried candles in a plastic bag or something, and they came up in there, turned on whatever type of illumination device that they had, and they found a bunch of bones and stuff up in there, and body parts and things, and they got the hell out of Dodge. There's also was a couple of reports of someone actually seeing a Bigfoot swimming under the water there in Salyer Lake. And I know for a fact from what an incident that we had, you were there. In fact, I think that might have been the first outing that I went on where I met you, Matt, down at Lake Texoma, where we had one swim across a bay there on Lake Texoma, come up onto a rock near where we were camped. And yeah, when I was there personally with Dan, it was blocked. You couldn't get in there. They had it all closed off. Yeah, that was years ago. But yeah, you're right about that. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was just saying that's not a real big community.
Right.
So, that many disappearances, was a major deal down there. And
exactly.
Word of it traveled all over the place.
Right. And this didn't happen all at once. This happened over a period of decades.
Right.
Also in that same area, and this really surprised me when I was down there investigating and talking to people, was that Route 152 passes through that area, and it goes right past Salyer Lake, goes right through Binger, and heads on out to the west. Route 152, Oklahoma Route 152, parallels the old historic Route 66, and it runs south of Route 66, but pretty much goes to the same place. It goes in it's an alternate route. And back during the Depression, there were a lot of people travel that road, Route 152. And as was common along the major, I don't remember exactly how we were alerted to its presence. I don't know if Bo tipped us off or somebody heard it. We shined lights over there and saw it, and Vicky took off over there towards it, and the thing dove loudly back into the water and swam for about 200 yards back across this little bay and came up on the far side. And we caught it in spotlights. So I personally have witnessed one swim 200 yards submerged. So it doesn't surprise me at all that one could swim around about anywhere it wanted to in Salyer Lake.
Right. There was an area I investigated years later in Oklahoma where there was at least one that was swimming across about, close to 300 yards of a lake to get from one area to the other. That was the only way it could get there, at least, unless it grew wings and flew. But I thought it was more likely that it was swimming across.
Right.
And I know that lake that you're talking about, they've closed it down multiple times because of the disappearances.
Right.
And blocked it off from people accessing it. And that's not a big community. Yeah, I think you can, but
Dan and Vicky have done even more than I have out there. And from what I understand, talking to some of the locals and who are native residents of that area, there have been at least 35 documented disappearances in the area in and around Salyer Lake over the years. And the Salyer Lake used to be open for swimming. There were so many people that were just supposedly, according to eyewitness accounts, were jerked underwater, or would be paddling around out there in the lake in a rowboat or a canoe or something, and the boat and the whatever watercraft it was would suddenly be flipped over, and one of the occupants would just disappear, would never come back up. And they would drag the lake, do all kind of stuff, send scuba divers down, and they they would never find the bodies. There were reports that there were caves around the edges of the lake that you could get into from under the water and come up inside the caves. There were some reports from some high school kids that supposedly, and I would not put a whole lot of credence into this because